First, we're gonna run this white oak through the planer. We're gonna get it to 3/4 of an inch, and then we're gonna run some walnut through the planer, and we'll get that to a 1/2 inch. All right, now that we have our boards flat, we can go ahead and put a fresh edge on them over at the joiner.
With the boards milled down, I cut them to their final width over at the table saw. And if you'd like full plans for this project, they'll be linked in the description below. And I've talked about this before, but whenever I'm cutting thin material, I like to use a feather board to make sure it stays fixed against the fence. The pieces I'm cutting here are going to make up the frames, which are going to be 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch sticks.
So now that all the rip cuts are done, we need to swap out the ripping blade for a crosscut blade, and then I'll cut out the rest of I'll cut out the shelves first. Put a fresh edge on all of these boards first, and then we can start cutting them to our final shelf length.
And hey, if you enjoyed this project, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there. To ensure consistent results, I set up a stop block at the table saw to cut out the square shelves.
All right, so now that all of the boards are flat and straight, we're going to cut 45-degree miters onto the one corner of all of these border pieces. I have a lot more than I actually need, but figure just batch them out, it'll be quicker that way. So we'll start cutting those with a miter gauge, and then we'll make the final length cut here in a minute. So I cut a ton of these, so I have a lot of extras, but some of these have a lot of spring in them. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take those out of the pile for now and only use the ones that will lay flat. To find the right length for the miters, I'm going to start long and then work my way back, sneaking up to the cut until we get to our final length for these pieces. And I'm gonna batch them out, cutting all of the shorter pieces first, and then we'll go ahead and cut the longer ones.
This is where a miter gauge with a stop really comes in handy, because you can just flip it up, make your initial cut, then flip it down and cut your pieces at their final length. And that is super useful when batching out parts. So with the pieces that I could cut with a stop block done, I use a marking knife to mark out the cuts for the longer frame pieces. And if you're enjoying this project, give it a like. This way it can spread to more people. Thanks. and I just made multiple passes with the miter gauge and snuck up to my line.
All right, so next I'm gonna cut some stops for the back of the frame. They'll rest against the wall and keep all the shelves parallel to the ground. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and glue these frames together. I'm gonna use some Titebond Quick and Thick, which is my first project actually using this on. I tried it out earlier, posted a story on it over on Instagram, so check that out. If you wanna see any updates in the shop, Instagram's the place to be. What I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna do the blue tape trick to tape up all of these miters. And with the Quick and Thick, we should have all these pieces dry really quickly and able to keep moving on with the project. So let's get these things glued up. And then when we go to close the joint, that'll act as a clamp and pull that joint and hold that joint tight.
Like I said, this is my first time using this Quick and Thick, so let me know if you've tried it out down in the comments, or if you have a preferred glue that you like to use that dries really quickly. Now, the open time for this stuff is only about 3 to 5 minutes, so if you are using it, have some pep in your step. So next I set up my dado stack, and I like to use my fingertips to measure out the thickness for my dado stack setup. And I also do the same thing when I measure out the height for the blade with a setup block. To set the right distance for the dado on the shelf, I use one of the blocks we cut earlier that supports the frame from the wall. And these dados allow more surface area for the glue, plus will add some structure to the frame. Next it was time to add some keyholes at the router table to allow the shelves to mount onto the wall.
All right, so next we're going to ebonize the black walnut, and we're gonna do that with some iron acetate, which is just some vinegar with steel wool soaked in it for about 7 days. This one's been going for 5, so it's a little early, but it should still work. And what it's going to do is it's gonna bring out the natural tannins in the wood, and you can do this with any wood that has high tannins. Black walnut, cherry, oak, those are all great woods to do it with. So let's get this and brush it on and turn this wood black. Just be careful not to touch this to any other of your projects and keep it away from other woods in your shop. Otherwise it'll turn everything black.
So here I'm just adding a few pieces of blue tape to both mark out the location for the shelf, as well as give me a little protection from glue squeeze out. Then I can mark out the location for the rear frame support and glue it on. On the longer, more horizontal version, I added 2 supports, but I did have to go back and add another 2 to the corners just because it did rack a lot against the wall. And that's mainly because our wall was not completely flat, so you may have to adapt this a little bit to make sure that it fits flush on the wall. And for the finish, I'm using penetrating oil, which really brings out the figure and makes that black ebonized walnut really pop. And finally, it was time to hang up the shelves and see how they looked. And just as a side note, I wouldn't put anything super heavy on these shelves, but they can support quite a bit. I think the shells turned out awesome, and the frames really add to that floating look. If you enjoyed this project, you'll probably enjoy some of my other ones, so subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and check out this video next. I'll see you next time.